Welcome back, everyone, and a very special welcome to you, the learner. We know you're here because you want to understand the invisible forces that shape the physical world around us.
You want to see the Matrix, basically.
Exactly. And today, the mission of our deep dive is to demystify a system that is quietly dictating the reality of almost every physical business you interact with on a daily basis. We are venturing into the complex, incredibly high stakes, and frankly, fascinating world of selling and buying commercial condominiums.
It is a world that operates entirely in plain sight. You drive past them, you shop in them, you probably work in one, yet it remains almost completely misunderstood by the general public.
Yeah, totally.
People tend to look at a commercial plaza and just see a collection of businesses.
Yeah.
They don't see the underlying legal architecture holding it all together.
Exactly. For our deep dive today, our source material is a comprehensive, deeply technical guide on selling commercial condominiums. It covers the governance, the physical types of units, the very specific minefields buyers face, the massive due diligence required before signing on the dotted line, and finally, how these concrete boxes are actually valued in dollars and cents.
Right.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. A technical real estate guide. That sounds like reading a dry manual, but I promise you it is not. This document is actually a treasure map. It's the secret blueprint to understanding how modern commerce physically operates.
It really is. When you read through the regulations, the bylaws, the intense legal frameworks laid out in these sources, you realize you aren't just reading about real estate. You are reading about power dynamics, urban planning, and the precise mathematical formulas that determine whether a business thrives.
Or whether it goes completely bankrupt before it even unlocks its front doors. Okay, let's unpack this right from the start. Because the best way I can describe buying a commercial condo, based on diving into these sources, is that it's absolutely nothing like buying a detached house. Buying a detached house is like buying your own private island. You make the rules. Buying a commercial condo is essentially like marrying into a very strict, legally binding family. You are getting the physical space, sure, but you are also inheriting their rules, their shared expenses, their debts, and their absolute authority over what you can and cannot do.
What's fascinating here is that if we take that analogy one step further, a commercial condominium isn't just a family or a piece of real estate. It is actually a micro-government.
A micro-government.
It's a highly structured, self-contained political and financial ecosystem. When you buy a unit, you are not just acquiring property. You are becoming a citizen of that specific micro-government. You are subject to its constitution, you are governed by its elected officials, and you are subject to its taxation system in the form of maintenance fees and special assessments.
Which is exactly why you, the learner, should care about this. Maybe you're an entrepreneur looking for a space to open a specialized medical clinic, a boutique cafe, or a light manufacturing shop.
Yeah, or an aspiring real estate mogul trying to figure out where to park your capital to build equity.
Exactly. Or maybe you're just incredibly curious about the invisible rules governing the stores, the offices, and the warehouses you visit every single day. By the end of this conversation, I guarantee you will never look at a strip mall or a downtown office tower the same way again.
Let's start right at the foundation. How does this microgovernment actually come into existence? The source material lays out the birth of a commercial condominium very clearly. It doesn't just spontaneously exist because a developer poured concrete and erected a building.
Right, the physical structure is just a building.
Exactly. It only becomes a condominium, a legal microgovernment, after it is legally registered. And that happens when the developer files two crucial documents at the Land Registry Office: the declaration and the description.
Right. And if we stick to our microgovernment analogy, the Declaration and the Description act as the absolute constitution. The text notes that the moment those documents are registered, a corporation without share capital is automatically created under the Condominium Act.
Yes.
And I actually want to pause on that specific phrase for a second because it's a weird concept for a lot of people to wrap their heads around. A corporation without share capital. If I start a tech company, I issue shares. If I buy into an index fund, I buy shares. How does a corporation exist without shares? What do I actually own?
It is a crucial distinction that trips up a lot of first-time commercial buyers. In a normal business corporation, you have shares, and those shares determine your ownership stake, your dividend payout, and your voting power.
Right.
In a condominium corporation, you do not hold shares. Your ownership is tied entirely to your specific three-dimensional physical unit, a volumetric box of air and concrete, and your proportionate interest in the common elements of the property, like the hallways, the roof, and the parking lot.
But the entity that manages all of this operates as a legal corporation.
Exactly. It can sue, it can be sued, it can enter into contracts.
And initially, the rules of this brand new corporation, the zoning, the use restrictions, what you can build, what color you can paint, the doors are set out completely by the developer, who is legally referred to in the documents as the declarant.
The declarants.
It sounds so regal, like a monarch declaring a new realm into existence. And for a brief period, they are basically the supreme dictator of this new realm. They write the constitution that set the initial budget. They make all the rules.
They do.
But the text is very specific about how and when that absolute power has to be stripped away from the developer and handed over to the people who actually buy the units. This handover process is called the turnover meeting.
And this transition of power is not left to the goodwill of the developer.
Yeah.
Developers, naturally, might want to hold on to control as long as possible to manage the project the way they see fit. The timeline for the turnover meeting is a fascinating mechanical process strictly outlined in the Condominium Act. When the condo is registered, the developer appoints the very first board of directors. It consists of 3 members, usually the developer's own employees or associates.
Okay.
And they have to do this within just 10 days of registering the condominium.
So for those first 10 days, the developer's hand-picked team is running the entire micro-government.
Exactly. But this developer-controlled board is inherently temporary. The legislation forces a democratic transition.
And the triggers for that transition are highly specific, which I found fascinating because it sounds like a ticking clock in a legal thriller. The developer has to call this turnover meeting within 21 days of ceasing to be the majority owner, meaning the second they sell off 51% of the units, the clock starts. But there are other conditional triggers too, right? To prevent them from just holding on to exactly 50% of the units forever.
Precisely. The legislation anticipates those loopholes. The source specifies that the turnover meeting must happen before the later of 2 specific dates, either the 30th day after the transfer of 20% of the units, or the 90th day after the transfer of the very first unit.
Wow. Let's play that out. If I buy the very first unit in a massive new commercial plaza and no one else buys a unit for 3 months, the developer still has to start handing over power by that 90th day.
Yes. That is the exact moment the dictatorship, the developer's total control, begins to transform into a democracy governed by the actual unit owners. It is arguably the most critical and vulnerable point in a condominium's entire life cycle.
Because at this turnover meeting, the owners finally get a voice.
Exactly. In fact, the owners have the right to appoint 2 additional directors to the board right then and there, diluting the developer's control.
Okay, so the owners take over, they hold an election. And I love looking at the qualifications to actually be one of these directors, because suddenly these unit owners are in charge of this massive commercial ecosystem. We're talking about physical infrastructure, legal liabilities, and reserve funds that could easily be worth tens of millions of dollars.
Yes, huge assets.
And the qualifications to be on the board, according to the text, are basically be over 18 years of age, be mentally competent, don't be an undischarged bankrupt, and don't have a registered lien against your unit that has gone unpaid for 90 days.
That is correct.
That's it. Just be a sane adult and pay your condo fees, and congratulations, you're managing a $20 million asset.
It is a terrifying thought when you phrase it that way, but it highlights a significant reality of condominium governance. The board of directors are essentially lay people elected by their peers. They might be brilliant dentists or mechanics or retail store owners, but they are not expected to be professional property managers or commercial real estate lawyers. They are responsible for enforcing the bylaws and the rules, but they lack the technical expertise to actually execute the day-to-day operations of a massive concrete structure. This is why the source material draws a very hard line between the elected board of directors and the hired condominium managers.
Right. So if the board is the ideas person, the democratically elected representatives passing the laws, the condominium manager is the civil service. They are the execution person, the hired professional who actually knows how a commercial boiler works or how to properly tender a contract for snow removal.
Precisely.
And unlike the board members who just have to be 18 and sane, the managers are heavily regulated. The text specifically points to the Condominium Management Authority of Ontario, or the CMAO.
The CMAO is the regulatory body that ensures these professionals actually know what they are doing. The source makes it clear that managers possess far more expertise in property management than the volunteer directors.
Makes sense.
The CMAO regulates their education, mandates specific licensing requirements, and enforces a strict code of ethics. The board makes the policy decisions. We need to fix the roof. But they rely entirely on the licensed CMAO manager to navigate the incredibly complex regulatory, financial, and physical realities of actually getting that roof fixed legally and within budget.
Okay, so we have the Constitution, the Declaration and Description, we have the elected government, the board of directors, and we have the heavily regulated civil service, the licensed condominium managers. Now, how do they actually control what happens inside the building? Because the text breaks this down into two distinct categories of laws: bylaws and rules. And if you are buying a commercial condo, misunderstanding the difference between a bylaw and a rule could literally destroy your business model.
It is a vital distinction for any buyer's due diligence. Let's look at bylaws first. Bylaws are the heavy machinery of the condominium's governance. They deal with standard procedures, internal operations, how the corporation can borrow funds, how meetings are run, and overseeing heavy regulatory matters.
So the big stuff.
Exactly. Because they are so fundamental to the structure of the microgovernment, bylaws are difficult to change. They are made, repealed, or amended by the board of directors. But crucially, they must be formally registered in the Land Registry Office to be legally valid. They are public, formal, and bureaucratic.
Right. If the board wants to change how the corporation borrows $1 million for a new HVAC system, that is a bylaw change. It requires a massive vote and formal government registration. But then you have the rules. And the rules are much more about the day-to-day lived experience within the building.
Yes.
The text says rules are developed for the safety, security, and welfare of the owners. And this is absolutely my favorite phrase in the entire document: for the prevention of unreasonable interference with the use of the common elements and the property.
Unreasonable interference is a brilliantly vague legal term doing a lot of heavy lifting. In a commercial setting, one business's completely normal operation could easily be another business's unreasonable interference.
Let's create a scenario. Imagine a high-intensity interval training gym operating right next door to a quiet, meditative massage therapy clinic. The gym dropping heavy barbells on the floor is essential to their business. But the vibrations shaking the walls of the massage clinic is unreasonable interference.
Precisely. The rules are the city ordinances designed to mitigate those exact frictions. They dictate things like what hours you can accept deliveries at the loading dock, where employees are allowed to park versus where customers park, or what decibel level is acceptable during business hours.
And they're easier to change than bylaws, right?
Much easier. Unlike bylaws, rules are fast and flexible. They do not need to be registered at the Land Registry Office. They become effective simply after a majority vote of the unit owners to approve them. Or, interestingly, they take effect automatically if no owner requests a meeting to contest them within 30 days of the board proposing them.
Which is a huge point for anyone trying to buy a unit. The text warns that real estate sales registrants need to be acutely aware of these rules because they directly impact the marketability and the functionality of a unit. If a rule says you cannot accept commercial deliveries after 5 p.m. because of noise complaints from nearby residential units, and you are trying to sell the unit to a logistics and distribution company that operates overnight.
That rule isn't just a minor inconvenience. That rule is an absolute deal breaker.
It destroys the viability of the business. And to ensure that new buyers aren't completely blindsided by the current state of this micro-government they are joining, to make sure they know about these rules, the financial health, and who is actually running the board. There are strict communication protocols mandated upon purchase. The text outlines the requirement for an NOIC and a PIC.
NOIC and a PIC.
They sound like classified intelligence dossiers. Let's decode those acronyms for the listener.
The NOIC is the New Owner Information Certificate. The PIC is the Periodic Information Certificate. Think of them as the State of the Union addresses for the microgovernment. The condominium corporation is legally mandated to provide the NOIC and the most recent PIC to new owners within 30 days of their purchase.
Okay.
These documents update the new owner on the current state of affairs, the names of the board members, the management contact info, and any immediate pressing operational issues they need to be aware of.
But the text note's a really funny catch-22 here. To trigger the delivery of these documents, the new buyer actually has to inform the corporation that the ownership has changed hands. The corporation isn't psychic. If you buy a unit and don't tell the property manager, you aren't going to get your NOIC.
Which is a basic administrative failure that happens more often than you'd think. But let's rewind a bit, because before you even get to that stage, before you close the deal and wait for your NOIC, the corporation might actually have a say in whether you are allowed to buy the unit in the first place.
Oh, right, the border control.
Exactly. This acts as the microgovernment's border control. The source talks about use restrictions and approvals. It says the condominium corporation may reserve the right to approve a buyer if they want to restrict certain types of uses based on municipal zoning and their own internal declarations.
Wait, hold on. If I have the money and the seller agrees to my price, the condo board can just step in and say, no, you can't buy this.
Yes, it is a critical hurdle. The agreement of purchase and sale for a commercial condo typically includes a specific condition, making the entire deal contingent upon the approval of the condominium corporation or its management.
Give me an example of how that would play out.
Let's say you want to buy a unit in a high-end office condominium to open a commercial bakery. You have the financing ready. But if your intended business involves industrial ovens, massive flour deliveries, and venting exhaust, and that violates the building's declaration of being strictly professional office space, the corporation simply will not grant approval. The deal dies right there at the border.
Okay, so that establishes the intensely regulated microgovernment environment we are operating in. We've got the Constitution, the elected board, the civil service managers, the bylaws, the rules, and the border control use restrictions. Now, let's transition from the invisible legal architecture to the actual physical concrete.
Real estate itself.
Exactly. Let's talk about the real estate itself, because if you manage to navigate this microgovernment and get approved, you still have to decide what kind of physical box you're actually buying into. And there's a massive difference in the options.
Indeed. The fundamental question for any business owner is usually, why buy a commercial condo at all? Why not just lease a space in a strip mall and avoid all this micro-government headache?
Because you want to build equity.
The fundamental benefit, regardless of the type of unit or the ultimate success of the specific business operating inside it, is equity building. The classic real estate dream applied to commerce. The source highlights this clearly. When a business rents a space, that monthly lease payment is an unrecoverable operating expense. It vanishes.
Right into the landlord's pocket.
By owning the commercial condominium, the business is turning that monthly cost into long-term asset value. The real estate itself appreciates over time, assuming the area grows, providing a financial bedrock for the owner that is entirely separate from their day-to-day business revenue. If the business has a slow year, the asset on their balance sheet might still be growing in value.
Okay, so you want to build equity. You approach a developer who is building a brand new commercial plaza. But when you go to buy one of these units directly from the developer, you are faced with a major structural choice regarding the physical state of the space. The text describes this as choosing between a shell unit versus a turnkey unit, and I would imagine most buyers just instinctively think a shell is cheaper and better because they can do whatever they want with it.
That is a common assumption, and it often leads to severe complications. Let's break down the difference. A turnkey unit is exactly what it sounds like. The developer completes the customized internal finishes based on the buyer's specific requirements before handing over the keys.
So it's ready to go.
Yes. The commercial-grade flooring, the drywall, the lighting grids, the plumbing fixtures, the HVAC distribution, it is all built out by the developer's construction crew. And the cost of all that construction is simply rolled into the final purchase price of the unit and thus rolled into the buyer's commercial mortgage.
So buying turnkey is like ordering a meal off a menu. You tell the chef what you want, they cook it, they serve it to you ready to eat, and you just pay the final bill. It's easy, but you pay a premium for the convenience.
You're right.
But then you have the shell option. The source says buyers can opt for just a shell unit, where they finish the space themselves. Buying a shell is like renting a commercial kitchen to cook your own meal. You get a raw, gray, concrete box. Nothing but exterior walls and utility rough ends.
Exactly. You have absolute control over every single design choice. You can build out the exact specialized medical clinic or high-tech server room you need, but the burden of execution shifts entirely to you. You have to hire the architects, pull the municipal building permits, hire the specialized commercial contractors, and critically, get the necessary approvals from the condominium corporation's board to actually build it out.
Because you can't just go breaking things.
Right. You have to ensure your contractors don't damage the common elements while building your interior. It requires immense project management skill.
And depending on the physical category of commercial condominium you are buying into, the nature of that shell and what you are actually allowed to do with it changes drastically. The source material categorizes commercial condominiums into 4 main archetypes: office, retail, industrial, and mixed use. Each operates with slightly different dynamics regarding what you own exclusively and what you are forced to share with your neighbors.
Let's run through them, starting with office condominiums. The text notes that your specific unit, the footprint where your desks and private meeting rooms sit, is registered separately with its own title. You own the airspace within those walls.
Okay.
But you share a massive amount of the surrounding infrastructure. The public washrooms on the floor, the media and conference rooms, the elevator banks, the underground parking spaces, the main lobby reception area. You own the private box, but the entire journey your clients take to get to that box is communal property managed by the board.
Right. And then you have retail condominiums. Think of an outdoor shopping plaza where every store is individually owned. Each store is separately registered. They might share a lobby or public washrooms if it's an indoor mall setting. But the text specifically highlights one crucial, uniquely shared element for retail condos: signage.
Yes, signage is huge.
In a retail condo, the ability to put your name on the building facade or secure a spot on the massive pylon sign by the road is a shared, heavily regulated commodity. We will touch on the immense financial value of signage later, but it is a critical shared element that can make or break a retail business.
Then we get to industrial condominiums, which is where the infrastructure starts to get really heavy duty. We are talking about warehousing, logistics distribution centers, light manufacturing, auto repair shops. The shared elements here aren't just decorative lobbies and elevators.
It's the big stuff.
The text lists shared shipping and receiving loading docks, heavy-duty industrial landscaping for transport trucks, massive shared HVAC systems, complex CCTV security networks, high-pressure sprinkler systems, and perimeter security fencing.
And here's where I want to push back a bit, or at least ask a question on behalf of the learner. Because the text explicitly states that maintenance fees in industrial condominiums are generally higher than in residential condominiums. If I buy an industrial condo just to store excess inventory, let's say it's 80% empty space with just racks of shoes, why are my maintenance fees so astronomically high? Why am I subsidizing the massive electrical and HVAC costs of the guy next door who is running heavy manufacturing lasers 12 hours a day? How is that fair?
It's an excellent question, and it speaks to the realities of shared infrastructure and municipal taxation. Your high fees are driven by two main factors outlined in the source. First, municipalities apply different, often much higher, commercial tax rates to industrial properties compared to residential.
Okay, so the base tax is just higher.
Even if your unit is just storage, the dirt it sits on is taxed at an industrial premium. Second, regarding the utilities, while individual units might be sub-metered for their specific electricity use, the overarching infrastructure required to deliver that industrial-grade power and water to the building is a shared common element.
So the capacity itself.
Exactly. Maintaining massive industrial transformers, reinforcing concrete loading docks that take the abuse of 18-wheelers every day, and servicing industrial-scale roof systems draws an immense amount of capital from the reserve fund, which inflates everyone's common expenses. You're paying for the capacity of the building, whether you fully utilize it or not.
That makes perfect sense. The capacity itself is the expensive part. Now, the final type of commercial condo is perhaps the most interesting because it combines absolutely everything we just talked about. The mixed-use condominium. I call this the layer cake.
The layer cake is a very apt analogy. The text describes mixed-use buildings as typically having retail stores on the ground floor, professional offices on the second or third floors, and then residential units stacked on the upper floors.
Right.
From an urban planning perspective, this is the modern ideal for a self-sustaining micro-neighborhood. You live, work, and shop in the exact same footprint. But what the source points out are the built-in symbiotic benefits for the owners operating within that layered building.
It's an ecosystem. The text says residential owners benefit because they can easily rent their units out at a premium in such a highly desirable, convenient location. The retail and office unit owners benefit immensely because they have an immediate captive market literally living right above them.
Yes.
If you open a premium coffee shop on the ground floor of a mixed-use building, you instantly have hundreds of residents upstairs who need coffee every single morning before they commute. You don't even have to market to them, they have to walk past your door.
It is a captive audience. But there is another deeply financial benefit mentioned in the source that often goes completely overlooked by the general public. The residential unit owners in the upper layers have the added advantage of sharing the overall maintenance expenses of the building's core infrastructure with the retail and office unit owners below.
Oh, that's interesting.
The heavy commercial entities, the restaurants and offices that generate significant revenue, help subsidize the upkeep of the physical structure, the roof, the foundational plumbing. This symbiotic sharing can actually make the residential maintenance fees more manageable than they would be in a purely residential tower of the same size.
It's a beautiful symbiotic financial engine. But of course, with all these different types of uses happening in the exact same physical space or even between adjacent buildings in a complex, there are incredibly complex legal ties holding it all together. The source mentions something called shared facilities agreements.
Yes, a condominium corporation doesn't always exist in perfect, hermetically sealed isolation. Often, they share physical boundaries and crucial infrastructure with other parties.
Like what?
For example, a commercial condo plaza might share a massive parking lot with a completely separate condominium next door. The shared facility agreement is a binding legal contract that dictates exactly how the two distinct microgovernments manage and, crucially, pay for shared driveways, shared parking lot lighting, shared snow removal, shared storm and sanitary sewers, and shared entrances or exits to the main road.
That sounds complicated.
The text explicitly warns that real estate salespersons must be acutely aware of the complexities of these shared facility agreements. They must make appropriate inquiries because these agreements represent binding, non-negotiable financial obligations for the buyer. If the plaza next door decides to repave the shared driveway, your condo board is legally obligated to pay their percentage, which means your maintenance fees go up.
Okay, so you've absorbed all this, you've decided you want in. You want to build equity, you've picked your physical fighter, maybe you want a raw shell retail unit on the ground floor of a mixed-use layer cake. Now you have to actually negotiate the purchase. And this brings us to Section 3 of our deep dive, the minefield.
The minefield, indeed.
Because the text draws a massive flashing red line between buying a brand new condominium directly from a developer and buying a resale condominium from a previous business owner. The pitfalls, the timelines, and the legal lifelines are completely different beasts.
Let's examine the unique and often painful challenges of buying a new condominium first. The source material lists several critical issues that a buyer of a new build must navigate, and many of them revolve around hidden costs and agonizing delays.
Oh, I noticed that.
The very first trap mentioned is municipal levies. When a developer builds a massive new commercial project, the municipality charges them for the cost of providing new civic services to that development. Upgrading the city's sewer mains to handle the new capacity, widening the roads for traffic, running new utility connections, these are called municipal levies. And the text points out that developers almost always include clauses that allow them to pass these levy expenses directly onto the new unit buyers.
Ouch. So you sign an agreement thinking you are paying $1 million for the unit, but then on closing day, the city's infrastructure bill gets passed down to you, and suddenly you owe an extra $40,000 just for the privilege of the city upgrading a stoplight down the street.
Exactly. It can be a massive shock to a buyer's cash flow if their lawyer didn't cap those levies during negotiations. But even before you get to the final closing day, there is what I consider the most agonizing part of buying a new build, occupancy and registration timings. This is where buyers get trapped in a bizarre legal and financial purgatory.
The text details this gap, and it's brutal. Tell us about the phantom rent.
The source explains that the pre-registration occupancy timing can be quite lengthy. There is a significant gap between when the physical building is finished enough for you to safely move into your unit. This is called interim occupancy, and when the condominium corporation is officially, legally registered at the land registry office, creating the actual title for your unit.
Okay, so you can move in, but you don't actually own it yet.
During this gap, which can last for many months, you are allowed to occupy the space. You can build out your shell, you can open your doors, you can run your business, but legally, you do not own the unit yet. The title doesn't exist.
And because the title doesn't exist, your commercial mortgage hasn't kicked in? The bank can't fund a mortgage on a property that legally isn't registered, but the developer certainly isn't letting you operate out of their building for free during these 6 months.
No, they are not.
The text says buyers are legally required to pay occupancy costs or occupancy fees to the developer. And here is the absolute kicker. These fees paid by the buyer before registration are not deducted from the final purchase price.
That is the crucial detail. It is essentially phantom rent. The source clarifies that these occupancy costs only cover the developer's prorated expenses for that specific period. You are paying for your share of the overall property taxes, the developer's massive construction mortgage interest on the building, and the building's master insurance policy. You are literally covering the developer's carrying costs while you both wait for the bureaucratic red tape of municipal registration to clear.
And none of that money builds your equity. It just vanishes, exactly like rent.
Exactly.
Wait, if I'm paying occupancy fees for 6 months and that's just dead money, why would anyone ever buy a new condo? Why not just wait until it's registered and buy resale?
It's a calculated risk. Buyers are willing to endure occupancy fees for the first mover advantage. Buying pre-construction allows you to secure a prime location, say the corner unit, with the most foot traffic years before it's built, often at a lower price per square foot than what it will be worth once the building is fully operational and registered. You are trading the pain of occupancy costs for the potential of immediate equity gain upon registration.
Okay, that makes sense. High risk, high reward. But here's another risk of buying new that blew my mind. You don't get a warranty.
Ah, yes.
The text is extremely clear about this. It states, point blank, no Ontarian warranty. Tarion is the provincial body in Ontario that provides strict, government-backed new home warranties for residential builds. If your new house foundation cracks, Tarion steps in. But the text emphasizes that, with the exception of mixed-use developments that have a residential component, purely commercial condominiums do not carry the Tarion warranty. It only applies to residential living spaces.
Correct.
So if the roof leaks in your brand new purely industrial condo or the HVAC unit fails on day 2, you cannot call to Tarion. You are largely on your own to fight it out in civil court with the developer.
Which is precisely why reviewing the site plan and the site plan agreements with the developer before you buy is so critical. A salesperson and a lawyer need to ensure that the developer has actually complied with everything they promised the city they would build to the proper specifications. Furthermore, without a standardized government warranty process, the buyer's lawyer must negotiate strong, private warranty clauses directly into the purchase agreement to cover defects in the common elements and the unit itself.
And beyond physical defects, there is a strategic, existential risk to buying new mentioned in the text. Business conflicts. Let's go back to our character, Bob. Bob takes early occupancy of a brand new retail unit to open a highly specialized luxury shoe store. He builds out beautiful displays, he pays his phantom rent, he's ready to dominate the local shoe market, but he needs to seek absolute clarification from the developer regarding the other units.
Yes. The developer's primary goal is to sell units as quickly as possible. Unless there is a restrictive covenant negotiated into Bob's purchase agreement, there is absolutely nothing stopping the developer from selling the unit directly next door to another, larger luxury shoe store.
Wow.
The source explicitly warns that buyers must ensure the business of other owners will not be in direct competition with their intended business. In a resale scenario, the condo board usually manages this through bylaws to ensure a healthy mix of businesses, but in a new build, the developer is the dictator, and they just want to sell boxes.
Imagine moving in, paying phantom rent, paying municipal levies, having no government warranty, and then looking out your storefront window and seeing your direct competitor hanging a grand opening sign right next door. It's a nightmare.
It happens.
So what if you want to skip the developer entirely? You want to avoid the phantom rent and the levy surprises. You decide to buy a resale condominium from an existing business owner. The risks change entirely. And your absolute best weapon, your legal lifeline in a resale transaction, is something called the status certificate.
The status certificate is arguably the single most important document in a resale condominium transaction. The source states emphatically that every agreement of purchase and sale for a resale unit should include a strict condition allowing the buyer and their lawyer to review the status certificate. And by law, upon formal request, the condominium corporation must provide the certificate within 10 days for a fee not exceeding $100.
I look at this as the ultimate diagnostic tool. It is the most valuable $100 you will ever spend in your entire business career, because this certificate tells you if the microgovernment you are about to pledge your allegiance to is secretly bankrupt or if it's extremely well managed.
It provides a comprehensive, legally binding X-ray of the operational, legal, and financial aspects of the corporation at that exact moment in time. The text lists exactly what must be included. It reveals the current common expenses to the specific unit you are buying. It shows if there are any arrears in payments by the current owner, meaning if the seller hasn't paid their fees in 6 months, you need to know because the condo corp can put a lien on the unit. And crucially, it states if there is any planned increase in common expenses in the current fiscal year. It includes a copy of the current declaration, the bylaws, and those flexible day-to-day rules we discussed. It also lists all current agreements for property management and the master insurance policy.
But the real meat of the status certificate, the part that keeps accountants awake at night, is the financial health check. It details the most recent reserve fund study.
Yes. The reserve fund is the microgovernment's savings account for major long-term repairs. The roof, the elevators, the underground parking membrane. The status certificate tells you the exact amount of money held in that fund, and more importantly, it tells you whether there are any special assessments looming on the horizon.
Let's define a special assessment, because I like to call them emergency wartime taxes. A special assessment happens when the corporation realizes they need to fix something massive, like a collapsing parking garage, and they look in the reserve fund and realize it's empty. They don't have the cash. So the board just hands a massive, unexpected, mandatory bill to all the unit owners to cover the shortfall. If the status certificate warns you that a special assessment has been levied or is being discussed, you could be walking into a trap where you buy the unit and a month later you get a bill for $50,000 to fix a roof you didn't even know was leaking.
Reviewing the status certificate is so critical that the text advises the buyer's lawyer must review it, alongside the declaration, the description, and the bylaws. The lawyer uses this highly specific information to advise the buyer on conditions, covenants, and restrictions that will directly impact how they can use the unit.
And if they find a special assessment is coming?
If the certificate indicates that capital improvements or heavy maintenance are coming up in the next year, the buyer needs to confirm the timeline and ensure there is actually enough money in the reserve fund to pay for it. If there isn't, the buyer uses that information to negotiate the purchase price down, forcing the seller to essentially eat the cost of the impending assessment.
But the status certificate isn't the only legal trapdoor in a resale. The text mentions something called the first right of refusal. And when I read this, it sounded like something out of a corporate espionage movie.
It is a remarkably powerful legal mechanism that catches many buyers off guard. The source advises that the agreement of purchase and sale must be reviewed to confirm if the condominium corporation's declaration includes a first right of refusal. This means that even if you negotiate a great deal, and the seller signs your offer to buy the unit, the condominium corporation itself has the legal right to step in, match your exact offer price and terms, and buy the unit instead.
They can effectively nullify your entire agreement at the 11th hour.
Yes.
So you do all the hard work, you do the due diligence, you negotiate a great price, and the condo board just swoops in and steals the deal. Why would they do that?
A board might execute their first right of refusal for a few reasons. They might want to tightly control exactly who enters the building, perhaps keeping out a competitor to a favored existing business. Or, more commonly, the corporation might need to acquire a unit for its own operational use.
Oh, like an office.
For instance, in a large mixed-use building, the board might want to buy a ground floor unit to house an on-site superintendent or to expand the property management office.
Yeah.
It's a vital detail to check.
Okay, assuming the board doesn't steal your deal, let's talk about renovations. Because whether you are buying a raw shell from a developer or you buy a resale unit that you want to completely gut and redesign, there is massive red tape. I think a lot of people assume, hey, I bought a resale unit, the developer is gone, I own it now, I can just hire a crew on the weekend and start knocking down walls.
That assumption will land you in severe legal and financial trouble. Finishing an internal space is entirely the buyer's responsibility, yes. But even in a resale, if the seller agrees to renovate the unit before the sale closes as part of the deal, or if you plan to renovate after closing, there must be strict adherence to the rules. Any work in the unit that involves or even touches common elements, which can include structural demising walls between units, plumbing stacks running between floors, or main electrical conduits, must be carried out with explicit prior written permission from the board of directors.
You have to submit your architectural drawings to the microgovernment for approval.
Precisely. Furthermore, it must comply with provincial government regulations. The text is very strict on renovation permissions and permits. The work must adhere to the Ontario Building Code and the Occupational Health and Safety Act. The unit owner or their licensed contractor must obtain a building permit from the municipality, and crucially, a specific permit from the Electrical Safety Authority, the ESA, is required for any renovation work involving wiring.
You can't just wing it with electricity.
You cannot just have a handyman splice a few wires. If you cause an electrical fire that burns down the adjoining units, your lack of permits will void your insurance and open you to catastrophic liability.
Which brings us to a fascinating, highly specific quirk regarding insurance that the source material points out. Buyers of commercial condominiums must be advised by their brokers to insure their own units, their contents, and their specific business activities with a comprehensive commercial policy. The condominium corporation pays for a massive master insurance policy, but that master policy only covers the outer structure, the common elements, and liability in the shared spaces. It does not cover the inside of your specific concrete box. And the text highlights one very specific physical element that buyers are entirely responsible for ensuring.
The window glass.
The window glass, yes. It is a standard exclusion in almost all commercial condominium master policies. I found that detail so memorable because it's incredibly counterintuitive. Let's create a scenario. You own a unit on the ground floor of a retail plaza. It's the middle of a brutal winter. A municipal snowplow drives by, kicks up a massive chunk of ice and rock, and it completely shatters your giant, custom-matched $20,000 storefront window. Your store is now exposed to the elements. You might instinctively call the condo board property manager and say, hey, the outside of the building is broken, call the master insurance. But no, the text explicitly says buyers must insure the window glass themselves because the glass bounding the unit is considered part of the unit owner's responsibility, not the common elements.
It is those tiny, highly specific exclusions, like window glass or specific internal HVAC distribution ducts, that can cost a business thousands of dollars in out-of-pocket replacement costs if they aren't properly advised by an insurance broker who understands commercial condominium structures.
And this intense emphasis on the specific details of the physical space leads perfectly into the next major phase of the transaction. Because the $100 status certificate only tells you the reality on paper. It tells you the financial and legal health of the corporation. But you also have a massive obligation to discover the physical reality of the unit itself.
Exactly. Which brings us to Section 4, playing detective. The rigorous process of due diligence, inspections, and uncovering detrimental conditions. Because in commercial real estate, what you see is almost never what you get, and what the seller discloses is not always the complete truth.
The source outlines these rigorous due diligence obligations. It states clearly that real estate salespersons have a fiduciary obligation to their clients to proactively identify and disclose all material facts, latent defects, and potentially detrimental conditions related to the unit. And this detective work doesn't begin with a flashlight and a tape measure. It begins at City Hall. It begins with zoning and legal compliance.
We can return to our border control analogy. You cannot just assume that because a unit is currently operating as a restaurant, is legally allowed to be a restaurant forever. Zoning bylaws change. Grandfathered uses expire upon sale. The text mandates that the salesperson should verify the current municipal zoning and any associated restrictions directly from the municipality's planning department website to confirm the buyer's intended business is explicitly permitted.
But the salesperson is not a lawyer.
Right. The buyer's commercial lawyer also steps in to confirm that the present use of the property can be lawfully continued by the new buyer under the current legal framework.
If it turns out there is noncompliance with zoning, say, the previous owner was running a commercial kitchen, but the zoning is strictly for retail and the city just hadn't caught them yet, that is a fatal flaw. The source warns that if buyers don't ensure their intended use is in complete compliance with both the microgovernment's declaration and the macrogovernment's municipal zoning, the use would be considered illegal. This results in the termination of the purchase agreement. Or worse, if they already bought it, the municipality could literally arrive with padlocks and shut the business down on day one.
It is a devastating risk. But assuming the paperwork says you are legally allowed to operate, you then have to actually look at the physical box you are buying, gathering information through visual inspections. The text says attention should be paid to the layout, the location of various utility services, features that specifically benefit the client's operations, and any immediate modifications that might be required. When working with a seller to list a property, potential physical issues should be identified early so they can be disclosed as material facts to potential buyers, avoiding lawsuits later.
But a visual inspection by a salesperson or a buyer just walking around the space is entirely surface level.
Yep.
You're just looking at drywall and carpet. The text strongly mandates structural and mechanical inspections by licensed professionals. The inspection condition in the offer shouldn't just be a general home inspector. It should specify commercial mechanical and structural components like the massive rooftop HVAC units, the three-phase electrical panels, and the commercial plumbing stacks. The buyer must be advised to hire third-party engineers to carry out these inspections.
And the source brings up a terrifying scenario regarding structural integrity that justifies this expense. A previous owner may have severely compromised the structural integrity of the building during their own major unpermitted renovations in the past.
Let's visualize this. A previous owner of a retail space wanted an open concept showroom, so over a weekend they knocked down a concrete pillar in the middle of the room. What they didn't know or didn't care about was that it was a load-bearing pillar supporting the concrete slab of the second floor. They threw up a drop ceiling to hide the damage, patched the drywall, and no one knew. Not even the property management. The text states that any hidden defect like this, identified during an assessment by a third-party engineer, will be considered a latent defect.
We need to define that term clearly. A latent defect is a hidden flaw that is not discoverable through a reasonable standard visual inspection by the average person. It is concealed. This is opposed to a patent defect, which is obvious, like a massive visible hole in the wall or a giant water stain on the ceiling. Structural compromises hidden behind drywall are severe latent defects, and if discovered, they severely affect the value of the property and open the seller up to massive liability.
Another massive invisible issue highlighted by the source is electrical overload. The text says sellers should be advised to proactively rectify any electrical detrimental condition caused by an inadequate supply or overloading before listing.
This is incredibly common in industrial and mixed-use condos. Imagine a buyer, let's call him Marcus, who purchases an older industrial condo for his specialized CNC machining business. He assumes that because it's an industrial building, it has infinite power. He signs the deal, moves in all his massive millions of dollars worth of computer-controlled lathes, and turns them on. Immediately, the main breaker for the entire floor trips. The electrical panels simply cannot handle the massive amp draw of his modern machines.
Wow, so he's stuck.
Marcus physically cannot operate his business in that space without a massively expensive electrical infrastructure upgrade, running new copper from the street transformer, which the condo board might not even allow him to do because it disrupts the common elements. A simple electrical load test during due diligence would have caught this.
It's these invisible infrastructure limits that kill businesses. And speaking of invisible hazards, this raises an important question about the history of the actual dirt the condo was built on, because the source dedicates significant attention to environmental issues. And in commercial real estate, environmental conditions are not just a minor headache, they're exceedingly serious existential threats. They include hazardous chemical substances, contamination of the soil and groundwater, the presence of endangered species on the wider property limiting development, or issues regarding protected waterways and historic archaeological sites.
Environmental due diligence is arguably the most terrifying part of commercial real estate. A commercial property's history can literally poison a deal and bankrupt the buyer. The text says environmental concerns should be openly discussed, expert services must be recommended, and specific conditional clauses for environmental testing must be included in the agreement of purchase and sale. And crucially, it's not just about what the current seller did inside the unit. The text says you have to investigate the current and past uses of the subject property as a whole, as well as adjoining properties.
I want to spend some time on this because it's so important. Let's create a horror story. You buy a nice, clean commercial unit to open Bob's Bakery. You do a visual inspection, the drywall is clean. But 20 years ago, in 1998, the unit directly next door to you was operated by Dan's Dry Cleaning. For a decade, Dan improperly disposed of highly toxic dry cleaning chemicals like PARs out the back door. Those chemicals seep deep into the soil and the groundwater beneath the entire concrete slab of the condominium complex. The chemicals have migrated under your bakery.
And under Ontario law, liability for environmental contamination is often strict and can be tied to the current owner of the property, regardless of who caused the pollution decades ago. If a lender requires an environmental assessment for your mortgage, or if the Ministry of the Environment discovers this historical contamination, the remediation costs the process of excavating the toxic soil and purifying the groundwater can be astronomical.
We're talking hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. The cleanup costs can literally exceed the total market value of the property itself.
Easily. Bob's Bakery would be bankrupt, and Bob would still owe the bank. From a due diligence perspective, this is why commercial transactions require an environmental site assessment, commonly known as an ESA. A Phase 1 ESA involves an environmental engineer digging into historical city directories, fire insurance maps, and aerial photos to see what the land was used for 50 years ago.
And if they find something?
If they find a red flag, like Dan's Dry Cleaning, they order a Phase 2 ESA, which involves physically drilling core samples through the concrete floor to test the soil. If a buyer waives their right to an ESA to try and win a bidding war, they are playing Russian roulette with their financial future.
So you've checked the zoning, you've hired an engineer to check the structural integrity, you've load tested the electricity, and you've drilled holes in the floor to make sure you aren't sitting on a toxic waste dump. There are two more crucial physical details you have to confirm before you buy. The first is measurements. The text is incredibly adamant about this. Never, ever just guess how big the space is and never trust the seller's brochure.
Accurate measurement is the bedrock of commercial real estate pricing. The text specifies that salespersons need not perform the complex measurements themselves if the seller provides a declaration of the unit area based on official documentation from a third-party professional.
But wait, why is it so complex? Can't I just take a laser tape measure? Shoot it from one drywall boundary to the other, multiply length times width, and get the square footage?
Absolutely not. In commercial real estate, where property is often valued at hundreds of dollars per square foot, a few inches matter immensely. The source specifies that buyers and sellers must rely on recognized, standardized measurement systems. Specifically, it mentions the BOMA standards, the Building Owners and Managers Association, or the IPMS measurement standards. Why do we need a standardized system? Because you have to know exactly where the measurement stops. Does your square footage include the thickness of the exterior brick wall? Does it stop at the interior paint? If you share a demising wall with your neighbor, does the measurement go to the middle of the studs in the shared wall, or just to your side of the drywall? BOMA dictates exactly how to handle structural columns, elevator shafts, and shared corridors. Buyers should hire a professional measurement company or an Ontario land surveyor to get these accurate measurements, especially if unpermitted alterations have been done to the unit in the past that might have changed the internal usable square footage.
The text also notes that official measurements can be verified from floor plans, from the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, or MPAC. But let's put some math to this so the learner understands the stakes. Let's say you are buying a 10,000 square foot warehouse. You just use a tape measure and get it wrong by 200 square feet because you didn't account for the thickness of the shared walls. Who cares, right? Just 200 feet out of 10,000. But if the condo's common expenses are $10 a square foot annually, you are overpaying your micro taxes by $2,000 every single year. Over a 10-year hold, you just bled $20,000 in pure profit because you didn't use a BOMA standard measurement. The text notes that accurate area, ceiling height, and volumetric capacity are especially critical for a buyer who wants to use a unit for warehousing and high-rack distribution.
It is a game of margins, and measurements dictate the margins.
And the final piece of physical due diligence is something we touched on earlier, but it is so deeply tied to revenue it deserves its own spotlight. Signage constraints. You want customers to find you. But your signage is constrained not just by the city bylaws regarding light pollution or height, but by the micro-government of the condo itself.
The exterior aesthetic of the building is a common element. Therefore, the text says the condominium corporation retains the absolute right to approve the design, the color, the illumination, and the size of street pylon signs, exterior facade signs, as well as the tiny nameplates in the internal lobby directory.
You could buy a premium retail spot on a busy corner, paying a massive premium for the location. But if the condo rules say you can only have a tiny, unlit, generic black and white font sign flat against the brick, your lucrative walk-in traffic is going to suffer immensely because people driving by at 60 miles an hour simply cannot see you.
Which perfectly transitions us into the final and perhaps most consequential section of our deep dive. Section 5, the bottom line. Valuation, listing, and closing the deal. We have explored the legal microgovernment, the physical types of units, the legal landmines of new versus resale, and the exhaustive detective work of due diligence. Now, how do all of these disparate, invisible elements synthesize into a final dollar amount? How do you figure out what this concrete box is actually worth on the open market?
The source outlines several specific factors impacting value, and what is truly amazing, looking at this list, is that almost every single thing we have talked about for the last 40 minutes directly translates into a literal financial penalty or a financial premium. Let's start with permitted uses, the border control. The text says the value of a commercial unit is directly affected by permitted uses under zoning, which may restrict or prohibit a wide range of business activities. A lack of approvals for alterations or vague documentation negatively affects value.
The logic here is simple. The flexibility of the asset dictates its premium. If a space is zoned and approved strictly to be a quiet professional office, The pool of potential buyers is small. It's worth less. But if that exact same physical space is zoned and board approved to be a loud, high-traffic restaurant with a liquor license, the pool of potential buyers and the revenue potential of the space explodes. The value increases proportionally with its utility.
But perhaps the most rigid mathematical factor impacting value is the maintenance fees. The source explicitly states that buyers are reluctant to buy a commercial unit if the maintenance fee is too high, and it introduces a concept to explain why, called the income approach to valuation.
The income approach is the bedrock of commercial real estate valuation.
I love the income approach because it strips away all the emotion. A commercial property is not valued on emotional attachment. It's not like buying a residential home where you walk in, fall in love with the marble kitchen backsplash, and emotionally decide to bid $50,000 over asking. Commercial real estate is a pure, cold numbers game.
Precisely. Under the income approach, a property is valued strictly on its ability to generate net operating income, or NOI. Let's walk through the math. Let's say a commercial unit can generate $100,000 a year in rental income. If the condominium maintenance fees are $20,000 a year, your net operating income is $80,000. Investors look at that $80,000 and apply a capitalization rate, a desired rate of return, to determine what they will pay for the property.
Okay, let's say the cap rate is 5%.
If the cap rate is 5%, an asset generating $80,000 in NOI is worth $1.6 million. But let's say the condo board mismanaged the budget and the maintenance fees suddenly jumped to $40,000 a year. The rent didn't change, but your expenses doubled. Your NOI drops to $60,000. At that same 5% cap rate, the property is now only worth $1.2 million. Just because the board increased the fees, your property mathematically lost $400,000 in resale value overnight. Therefore, using the income approach, an increase in maintenance fees mathematically unavoidably results in a lower value estimate for the unit itself.
So high fees mean a lower sale price. It's a direct inverse relationship. Another massive factor is the reserve fund and special assessments, which we found during our due diligence in the $100 status certificate. The text says insufficient monies in the reserve fund may result in a special assessment, which negatively affects value. If a buyer sees a $50,000 special assessment coming next year to fix the roof, they aren't going to just happily absorb that cost.
No rational commercial buyer would. The text says buyers may negotiate a lower purchase price as direct compensation, or they may demand a clause that the seller must pay for the entire special assessment amount out of their proceeds before closing. The impending liability reduces the net value of the asset to the seller.
Furthermore, the day-to-day rules and regulations of the condominium directly impact value. The source states that any rules or regulations that are too restrictive for the use of common elements negatively impact the value of commercial units. We discussed signage earlier. The text explicitly links this to valuation. Businesses that rely on walk-in customers need appropriate signage. If it is not available or is severely restricted by the board to maintain a minimalist aesthetic, it results in lower foot traffic, which equals lower revenues, which translates directly to a loss of value for the unit under the income approach. Every single restriction is a mathematical deduction in value.
Parking is another massive value driver. The text points out that limited availability of parking for employees, customers, and particularly delivery trucks results in a significant loss of value. If your customers have nowhere to park, they simply drive to your competitor. The revenue drops, the NOI drops, the asset value drops. Then there is the external environment. The text mentions surrounding properties.
Right. Complementary uses of adjoining properties positively impact value as they generate a symbiotic halo effect of business. A premium coffee shop located right next to a massive, bustling office building is a gold mine. The office workers are a built-in clientele. But the text warns if a commercial condominium is surrounded by heavy industrial properties, it will negatively impact value for certain businesses. No one wants to go to a high-end, relaxing boutique spa if it's located next to a noisy, dusty, vibrating concrete mixing plant. The environmental noise pollution destroys the business model.
And we must return to environmental issues, as they are the ultimate wild card in valuation. The source states that property value is maintained if the seller has proactively obtained an environmental site assessment, an ESA report, and no contamination was indicated. A clean Phase 1 ESA is essentially a clean bill of health that gives buyers and lenders confidence. However, if contamination was identified and a costly ministry-mandated cleanup was required, the value is negatively impacted, potentially to the point where the property is unmortgageable and therefore unsellable until it's remediated.
So those are the myriad factors dragging the intrinsic value up or down, but how does a real estate professional actually calculate the starting number to put on the listing? The text describes methods for providing value opinions. The primary, most common method is the direct comparison approach.
This approach involves comparing the subject unit to recently sold, highly similar properties, ideally within the exact same condominium complex, and making incremental adjustments to their sale price to arrive at an estimate of value for your unit. If a unit identical to yours sold for $1 million last month, yours is likely worth roughly $1 million. But the text notes a critical weakness here. The strength of this method depends entirely on the availability of reasonable comparable sales. In commercial real estate, units are highly customized. If your unit has a specialized $200,000 commercial kitchen installed, and the only unit that sold recently was a raw shell, it is incredibly difficult to compare them directly.
So what you do if you are unique? In cases where there are no internal comparables within the same condominium complex, the source recommends external comparisons. This means looking at the sale of similar units in similar competing outside buildings in the same municipality.
However, the appraiser or salesperson must make appropriate mathematically sound value adjustments for differences in location, features, and amenities. A 2,000 square foot retail unit in a building located directly on a major municipal transit line is not a direct comparable to a 2,000 square foot retail unit in a building 3 blocks away from the transit line, even if the internal finishes are exactly the same. The foot traffic is different. Adjustments must be made for the location premium.
And making those adjustments accurately requires immense localized skill, which is why the text emphasizes salesperson's knowledge. Salespersons must have proven experience in the specific type of property for which they are providing a value opinion. Valuing an industrial warehouse is a completely different skill set than valuing a medical clinic, and the text lays down a hard, unyielding ethical rule. As per the Regulatory Code of Ethics, if a salesperson does not have adequate knowledge, skill, competence, or judgment regarding a specific commercial asset class, they are not authorized to provide services.
It is a mandate to know your own limits. If a residential agent is suddenly asked to sell a complex industrial condominium with potential environmental contamination, they must decline. Instead, the text dictates they should refer their clients to professional commercial appraisers, or environmental engineers, or commercial lawyers. Knowing what you don't know is the most crucial skill in commercial real estate.
Okay, so finally, let's say all the due diligence is done. The ESA is clean, the BOMA measurements are exact, the income approach has justified the price, and the value is established. The property is ready to be listed. The text provides guidance on the final obligations for listing a commercial condominium. It advises sellers to make physical improvements to their unit before listing by cleaning, repainting, and replacing worn carpets or window coverings to maximize the aesthetic appeal. But it reminds us of the microgovernment rules. If significant changes or alterations are required to make it presentable, the seller must get the necessary permission from the board of directors and building permits from the municipality first, even if they're just doing it to sell.
And when you are listing the property, the salesperson has an absolute obligation to accurately explain the ongoing costs to the new buyer. The buyer needs to know their exact microtax burden. The text explains how common expenses are allocated. It introduces a vital document called Schedule D.
Let's break down Schedule D. Common expenses, or maintenance fees, relate to all expenses associated with the management and operation of the common elements: the roof, the manager's salary, the landscaping, the master insurance. These massive costs are divided proportionately among all the unit owners, but it's not divided equally. If there are 10 units, you don't all just pay 10%. Schedule D calculates the common expenses for a specific unit by multiplying the unit's physical surveyed area by a per square foot cost of the overall common expenses.
It is an exact science based on proportion. If the annual budget for the condominium is $100,000 and your unit occupies 15% of the total square footage of the entire building based on those strict BOMA measurements, your common expense allocation under Schedule D will be exactly 15%, or $15,000. The larger your physical footprint, the larger your financial responsibility for the microgovernment's infrastructure.
So we have reached the end of the guide. What does this all mean for the learner? It means every single thing we've discussed today, from the dictatorial power of the declarant to the lack of a government-tearing warranty, to the results of a BOMA measurement down to the inch, to the rules about what size and color sign you can hang on your door, to the historical dry cleaning chemicals buried in the dirt. Every single invisible restriction, feature, and historical fact has a literal mathematical dollar amount attached to it. It affects the final sale price, it affects the Schedule D microtaxes, and it ultimately dictates the life or death viability of a business.
It is a profoundly interconnected, deeply complex system. You simply cannot isolate the physical brick and mortar from the legal structure of the declaration, or the financial realities revealed in the status certificate. They were all inseparable components of the exact same machine.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by exploring the legal creation of a condominium, framing it not just as real estate, but as a micro-government governed by constitutional declarations, heavily regulated bylaws, and elected layperson boards, supported by CMAO-licensed civil servants. We looked at the physical variations from the absolute control of a raw shell to the convenience of a turnkey retail shop to massive industrial spaces with astronomically high utility costs and the symbiotic perfection of the mixed-use layer cake.
Yes, quite the journey.
We navigated the specific, terrifying minefields of buying brand new units versus resale units. We uncovered the agony of paying phantom rent during occupancy, the shock of hidden municipal levies, and the absolute diagnostic power of the $100 status certificate in exposing emergency wartime special assessments. We dug into the grueling detective work of due diligence, from confirming municipal border control zoning to uncovering hidden load-bearing structural defects to the existential threat of environmental contamination requiring an ESA. And finally, we saw how all of these factors merge mathematically through the income approach, cap rates, and direct comparisons to determine the ultimate financial value of the concrete box. Buying or selling a commercial condo isn't just a real estate transaction. It is navigating a complex ecosystem of municipal laws, private condominium governance, shared physical infrastructure, and rigorous, unforgiving financial analysis.
It truly demands a multidisciplinary approach. It requires the seamless synthesis of legal, financial, and physical data to make an informed decision. Ignorance in this arena is exceptionally expensive.
So I want to leave you, the learner, with a final philosophical shift. Because once you see the matrix, you can't unsee it. Tomorrow, when you walk into your local dentist's office in a sleek mid-rise, or a boutique retail store in an outdoor plaza, or an auto repair shop located deep in an industrial park, take a moment to really look around. Look at the walls dividing the spaces. Look at the exact size and placement of the sign above the door. Look at the painted lines restricting where you can park your car. You are no longer just looking at a business operating inside a building. You are looking at a highly negotiated, fiercely regulated, shared reality. A physical reality strictly governed by invisible declarations, heavily scrutinized status certificates, and binding shared facility agreements. Which begs the final question beyond the tired business owner standing behind the counter, who really controls the space we do business in. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking hard questions, keep looking past the surface level of the built environment, and keep exploring the hidden systems that build our world. We'll see you next time.